I'm Rick Wade, Senior Vice President at the United States Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. You know, far too often, the opportunity to obtain an education, to secure a job, to access quality health care, or start and run a business, or simply to provide for your family, unfortunately, still determined by the color of your skin. While the work to close the racial divide is not easy, it must be done nonetheless. This is more than a moral mandate. Racial equality is also an economic imperative and a matter of America's economic competitiveness. You know, central to our competitiveness and our economy and inclusive growth is the growth of Black-owned businesses across America. Our Equality of Opportunity initiative is about advancing what we call equality of opportunity, private sector and public sector solutions to ensure that every American, regardless of who they are or where they come from, have a fair shot at realizing their own American dream. Black-owned businesses are not only job creators, but they are important anchors in our communities and threads in the fabrics of our society. Early in the 20th century, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma was the epicenter for African-American entrepreneurs. The thriving, dynamic business district comprised of a 35 square block area became known as Black Wall Street. Resentment, unfortunately, over Black economic success and a racially hostile climate eventually led to the 1921 Tulsa race riot. The Greenwood district, as we knew it, was burned, and the people, as well as their businesses, their property and dreams, were destroyed. But this event today will explore the businesses that existed on Black Wall Street, the hero entrepreneurs who created them. And we'll talk about pathways to success for today's Black-owned enterprises. Let's get started. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ken Harris, my good friend, president of the National Business League, who will lead a conversation with the renowned screenwriter Frederick Williams, the author of Heroes of Black Wall Street. Ken.
On behalf of the National Business League, it is an honor to moderate today's U.S. Chamber of Commerce panel discussion. And thank you to the leadership of Rick Wade with this wonderful focus today, equality of opportunity in action, and a historical perspective on Black Wall Street and its relevance, and an opportunity for me to moderate this distinguished individual, Frederick Williams, screenwriter of Heroes of Black Wall Street. Let's jump right into it, shall we? Frederick Williams, how are you today?
Doing just fine, Dr. Harris. Thank you.
Outstanding. Let's start with our first question I would love to know about. We hear a lot about the death and destruction resulting in the 1921 Tulsa massacre. What have you learned about Black-owned businesses and the entrepreneurs that you refer to as the heroes of Black Wall Street?
Thank you for that question. And first, I want to thank the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for doing this. It's been too long coming. Everyone, all these programs you see will concentrate on one thing, the destruction. How many times have we heard the word massacre, massacre, massacre? And so that defines the way we look at it. Today, thanks to the Chamber, we're going to look at it from the business perspective. When I first started my research on this project back in 2009, I was caught up in the same thing, the destruction. And then when I started doing my research, I started reading about men like J.B. Stratford, who built the Stratford Hotel, O.W. Gurley, who bought units for people to live in, sold them, and built the Gurley Hotel. I read about John and Lola Williams. John had a repair shop. His repair shop was so good, whites brought their cars to him. He saved his money and started the Williams Confectionery. It was a place for young people to go and have their soft drinks and talk. And they say more engagements were made in the Williams Confectionery than anywhere else in the city. Then they built the Dreamland Theater. Dreamland Theater held over 700 moviegoers. And now Blacks didn't have to suffer the indignity of going up to the balcony of a theater, they could go sit where they wanted. And he brought all the major movies there, and he brought the Oscar Micheaux movies there also. And then about Smitherman. Smitherman had the Tulsa Star, a top-notch newspaper that kept the information going to the community there. And then we had Dr. A.C. Jackson. The Mayo brothers said that Dr. A.C. Jackson was one of the most competent physicians in the country. And so I wrote my first novel, Fires of Greenwood, the Tulsa Riot in 1921, in 2013. But then I started thinking, well, no, I'm doing the same thing everyone else does. And we're missing the bigger picture. We're missing how under tremendous obstacles, these folks built these businesses. I mean, that was a total apartheid system, and they still were able to do that. They say J.B. Stratford's hotel would match any hotel in the country built by a Black, and sometimes by anyone. And so I was able to join up with Andrew Collins, who will be on later, and Judy James, who was part of the Dreyfus James production company. And I told them what I wanted to do. They said they would assist me. So I started writing the screenplay, Heroes of Black Wall Street, concentrating on the businesses, concentrating on the heroes that help defend their communities. And so that's how then we brought on Andrew Wyatt, who joined us. And so that's where we are today. We have a script that will make a fantastic movie. And for one time, you know, Blacks and whites can walk out of the theater saying, I feel those folks were victors. They were not victims. If I hear the word victim one more time today, as they revisit what happened on June 1, 1921, I think I'll scream. And so I hope that answers that question for you, Dr. Harris.
Absolutely, Frederick. We have to change the narrative, and that's exactly what you're doing. And we have to look at things from a Black lens and a Black perspective. Along that lines, who were some of the Black business entrepreneurs on Black Wall Street, and what is it about them that should inspire us all?
Okay, I think I named some of them, but I'll reiterate. I'll start with J.B. Stratford. He is my hero, believe me. And he would be like a Rockefeller to the Black community. He was born as a slave in 1862. His father bought his freedom, and that's an interesting story because when his father went to the owner or plantation owner, I don't say master. That's out of my, I don't use that word, okay? Because they were not masters. If anything, they were our oppressors. So when he went to the owner and says, look, I want to buy my family's freedom. Well, the man said, well, I'll do that, but what if they pass legislation to free Blacks? What'll happen then? That man promised that if his family was freed, he'd still pay off his debt. And of course, you know, in 1865, Blacks were freed, and especially by the 13th Amendment, and he kept his word and paid them off. JB went to law school in Indianapolis, Indiana, ended up in Tulsa in 1906 after the oil rush over at in Tulsa. Set up his businesses at the same time that O.W. Gurley. O.W. Gurley was born in 1868, came to Tulsa at the same year that J.B. Stratford did. They decided, look, the way we're going to survive is that we keep our money within our community, that the two of us have resources. Let's loan money so when Blacks come in and want to build businesses, we will support them. And pretty soon you had from 1906 to the 1921, they built up over 200 businesses. Most of them were located on Greenwood Avenue. But you had jewelry stores, you had clothing stores, you had OB Man, had the grocery store. They had everything they needed. And what they did is they kept the money in the community. Quite naturally, a lot of the money they made was by working over on the south side of Tulsa to the rich white people. But they would bring their money back in and save it. And one story that's really beautiful is Mabel Little. Mabel Little left her home in Bolo, Oklahoma, with $1.25. Her mother said, "You'll be working the streets in a year." When she got to Tulsa, she took jobs working in the hotel, cleaning up the rooms as a maid. She saved her money. She married Presley Little, and he was shining shoes. They were doing this, of course, with white patrons, but they saved their money. Pretty soon, Mabel opened up a beauty shop in her home. Then she was able to open one with 10 hairdressers on Greenwood Avenue. And he was able to open up a cafeteria where he featured smothered steak. And they say folks from the other side of town came over to eat that food. And so they built up wealth. Starting with nothing, they built up the wealth. So, and then we have O.W. Gurley. I mentioned him. You have J.B. Stratford. Let's talk about O.B. Mann. O.B. Mann and his brother owned the Mann grocery store. It was not on Greenwood. It was one street over on Lansing. Everyone would go to that grocery store to get their groceries. In 1917, O.B. Mann was drafted into the United States Army. He went over and fought in the 369th Regiment, which was a unit out of New York. And of course, they couldn't fight with the white soldiers, so they fought with the French soldiers. They were so good, they named them the Harlem Hellfighters. O.B. comes back to Tulsa. And you know, Woodrow Wilson had made the promise, well, if you boys put aside your differences and go fight for us, we'll give you democracy when you get back. Well, we know that didn't happen, but O.B. Mann did say one thing: you will not lynch anyone. And he just doesn't say black. He said, you will not lynch anyone in Tulsa while the veterans are here. And he lived up to that promise too. So these were businesses that we really, really highlight in the movie Heroes of Black Wall Street. And that's what we should be doing. We should be giving kids, my God, for the last year, take a 10-year-old kid. What has he seen over and over again is a policeman's knee in a black man's neck? What have the women seen? They've seen a black woman get shot in her apartment and killed. Now we got another case in Louisiana. My God, let's give them a break, man. Let's hug them and give them something they can believe in. And that's what we want to do. And we want to get everybody out there to help with us doing that so that we won't have any problems getting this movie financed.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So on top of that, Frederick Williams, when we think about these two questions together, how was the name Black Wall Street derived? And number two, this was a difficult and painful time for the Tulsa community and frankly in our nation's history. What do you think is so important for us to acknowledge about these events and recognize in terms of the impact it not only had on Tulsa, but in Black businesses more broadly? So first question, how was the name derived? And then what is the impact on Tulsa with this story and Black businesses broadly?
This is great for you, my friend, because Booker T. Washington was on his way to another town in Oklahoma, and he stopped in Tulsa. And he went down Greenwood, and he saw what these Black businesses were doing. Now, of course, that's right up his alley, because he believed our success in America would be to build and grow our own businesses. And when he saw that, he was so excited about it, he named it Negro Wall Street. And of course, as the years went by, everyone all of a sudden thought Negro was a terrible name. I don't happen to agree with them that it was like disgrace for us to be called Negro. So we changed it to Black Wall Street. And that's how it got the name. From Booker T. Washington, founder of where you are now running the company.
Absolutely, the National Business League. And that second question, knowing that it was a difficult and painful time in Tulsa community, frankly, in our nation's history, again, why is it so important to acknowledge these events and the impact that it had on Tulsa and the broader Black business community?
Oh, it's just think if they hadn't did a conspiracy of silence after it happened, the officials in Oklahoma and throughout the country, they buried it. So what they were burying was the atrocity of the killings. But in doing that, they also buried these very successful Black businesses. And if our kids, if our young people over the years would have known about a J.B. Stratford, O.W. Gurley, Andrew Smithman, and Dr. Jackson, it may have made a big difference in how our kids view themselves. And so that's the importance that we do it now. That's the importance of Heroes of Black Wall Street. We have to. It's almost mandatory for our young and also for our adults who don't know of the success that Black people had in 1921. And it might encourage more young people to go in business. They may say, instead of always saying, I want to be a LeBron James, which we know everyone can be, they'll say, I want to be a J.B. Stratford. I want to be an O.W. Gurley. Let's give them some options. My God, they deserve it, don't they? And so the successful Black businesses, probably most of them didn't even know of the success of Black Wall Street. And what they're an outgrowth of that. It shows that not only did we have outstanding Black businessmen and women in 1921, we got them in 2021. And there's a connection that we have to make.
Absolutely. And in our final question, I just want to say thank you to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for hosting this part of the program amongst an amazing program put together. And as a final, not only acknowledgement and inspiration, what would be some of your final comments that you would like to give to the audience today, Frederick Williams?
My comments are that I kind of touched on them throughout our discussion. We know what happened. We've been inundated with 300 men, women, and children killed. Now they're back to digging up graves. That's all important. But let's put more importance on the Black businessmen and women who built a very successful business community in the worst of times when apartheid ruled. And that brings a sense of pride to our race, to our kids, to our adults, and hopefully something that the whole country, the whole world can come to admire for what these men doing. So my final word is, all we have to do now, and of course this is the hardest part of any project, is we have the screenplay, we have the hero, Dan Glover, who is joining us. Now all we need is one thing. It's for, I want to say Black businesses, but I want to say all businesses to join us and make this happen. But certainly we would like for the National Business League, all those successful businessmen, take a look at what they did in Greenwood, and you can do the same by making this a reality. I want to thank the National Business League and the Chamber of Commerce for allowing me to take this time to express my most deep, sincere feelings, long years of hard work doing this research to finally see we're getting closely, maybe to where it can become a reality and we can show it on a screen all over the world. Thank you.
Outstanding, Frederick Williams, screenwriter of Heroes of Black Wall Street. Is an absolute honor on behalf of the National Business League to moderate this panel with our illustrious founder, Booker T. Washington, who coined the term Black Wall Street. Thank you so much to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. On to the next program.
Dr. Ian Harris and Fred Williams, thank you so much for that conversation. I have the pleasure of introducing you. Quite frankly, we don't need an introduction, but we're being joined now by the man, an actor, producer, humanitarian for more than 30 years. This man named Danny Glover. And listen, Danny, Escape from Alcatraz, Silverado, The Color Purple, Mandela, Predator 2, Jumanji: The Next Level, Mr. Pig, Hill Street Blues, Lethal Weapon 1 through 900,000, and the list goes on and on and on. Now you are here with us and you're working on and consulting on a new film, The Heroes of Black Wall Street. Tell us more, The Heroes of Black Wall Street. Why and what does this mean to you?
Well, you see so much conversation around this, particularly on the day of the massacre that occurred in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Greenwood district. And it's a conversation about this. And maybe today, sometimes we have to understand, as Brother Williams said, understand where we find Black success in the midst of just extraordinary racism at this particular point in time. The early part of the 20th century, you had, in 1916, you had Birth of a Nation, G.W. Griffith's depiction, which led to a reconstitution of the Ku Klux Klan. Klan we think of simply as the South, but the Ku Klux Klan was on the Midwest as well. These were new territories. These were new territories before the Civil War and the settlement of those territories. And it's the places where African Americans went because of the virulent racism and historic racism of the South post-Civil War and the Reconstruction period from 1865 to 1877. So extraordinary success that African Americans has made. Du Bois's book, Black Reconstruction, is a true account of the accomplishments that African Americans made post-Civil War. Extraordinary, up and out of slavery, to make enormous contributions not only to the Black community and the building of a consensus of free human beings, of free citizens. That's 4 million free citizens. Not only that, but they also began to flourish in education, flourish. We can name so many people that have orchestrated this. Certainly, there was a level of internationalism as well, the sense that the struggle was not simply in the United States of African descendants and Africans, but around the globe as well. Places like Europe, places in Africa. And a lot of this was made possible by the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was an abolitionist delegation. It formed at the end of the 18th century, just after the formation of the country itself. So we have this history in the sense that we have to understand, because as James Baldwin said, when we cannot tell the truth about our past, we become trapped in it. So there's just so many reasons why it's important to understand, but also understand the contradictions that exist as well. You know, the questions that we have is Black and that is and I think that's a question that we need to pose as well. Businesses, but the small businesses are generic at a point in time in its history, in this country's history. What are the decisions that are made on our lives and affect our lives? Business sector itself. And most of those are not small businesses, were the pre development of the capitalism. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I think we lost it. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
All right.
I think you're back. Danny, let me ask you this, because you know one of the unique aspects that heroes of Black Wall Street will amplify and portray the Black businesses as the successes and heroes, and the lessons that we can learn. You talked about the 1915 film, The Birth of a Nation. What is the role of film and entertainment in the portrayal of the Black entrepreneurs? Because Black folks have always been innovators and entrepreneurs in the early 19th and 20th centuries. But what is the role of film and entertainment and movies in helping to portray those images of Black innovators and entrepreneurs?
Well, the whole idea of film in the beginning of the 20th century is a new avenue to project the image of the U.S. and the U.S. and exceptionalism. We find that the use of film is creating images, and that was a part of what it was used. Now, the film in 1916 is shown where? The first time ever a film is shown at the White House was in 1916, and that is with Woodrow Wilson as the president. Woodrow Wilson was a Southerner. He was the president of Princeton University, which is considered the Ivy League South. And so he was the president of that, and he showed this film, which saw more lynchings in the 20th century after showing of them than black people. So the importance of film is it is still very important part of how we see ourselves and create images and tell stories and begin to assess and determine what has value, who has value, and what value do they have.
Right.
Those are the things that are clearly important in film. By telling this story of this extraordinary moment, a short period in African American history, but an important moment when Black people come together and become successful. But it's also a moment of an extraordinary change in this country as well. And we have to understand that as well, how the changes that will rapidly happen with in the end of World War I, 20th century industrialization, and all those things, which eventually lead to what in 1929? The collapse of the market and the world depression and everything that happens after that is the emergence of the new empire, post-World War II empire that is the United States, and has ascended to that throne and still remains at that throne. So there's a lot to understand about not only what our contributions are to our community, to bringing ourselves, creating a new narrative for African American success on their own terms, using that to build community, all those things, and shaping their own narrative for themselves. That was an important part of that moment at the beginning of the 20th century, to carve out that space and to create that space. And that space is infringed on. That space is undesirable. And what you do is you annihilate that space. And again, once again, white exceptionalism, racism, and all those things come to bear. Right. But also at the same time, we're not absent from the new ideas that are around the world now. The new ideas, you have Eugene Debs had run for president and is in prison at the time of Black Wall Street, and I'm sure condemned what had happened. But Eugene Debs, a labor leader, a socialist who ran for president 4 times in the beginning of the 20th century, and certainly was in jail for sedition. So the idea of these two things are important to understand, and their intersection in terms of questioning the system that had been built on backs of formerly enslaved Africans. It built on that back. The wealth built on that, and we all acknowledge, Du Bois acknowledges that. Also, Paul Robeson acknowledges, and so many people acknowledge that particular point in time. We see this still issue that this country has to deal with as it begin to shape its idea of itself, its idealism, and its exceptionalism and everything. They have to deal with the remnants of slavery, the results of slavery, and by that, and the continued attacks on people of color. And even when they tried to farm it in Greenville, North Carolina, Greenville, North Carolina, they formed a multiracial government in the city. And there was a riot and overthrow of that government in 1898. So all these kind of dynamics are happening here. And I'm sure at the same time, Black businesses and entrepreneurs were crushed under the weight of the racism. So we've been crushed under the weight of the racism.
Right. Danny, let me ask you as I would love to talk all day with you. I grew up in South Carolina, by the way, and I remember in my hometown, which was a former textile town, was our version of, I guess, Black Wall Street. We call it the Hill. It was where there were doctors' offices and fresh seafood markets and a thriving business community. And you think about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, I mean, it was flourishing. It was where there were pharmacists and beauty salons and restaurants and grocery stores and every business you can imagine. Is the best case of what we call self-reliance economy born out of necessity, because, you know, folks couldn't go anywhere else. But my question to you today, can Black Wall Streets exist and thrive again as we knew Tulsa and Black Wall Street? What was then? Can
repeat that question, Internet. Repeat that question, Rick.
Can we create? Can there exist sort of Black Wall Streets today across America? Can what was happening in Tulsa back in the 1920s? Can we create Black business district today?
I'm breaking up.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties.
Okay. Go ahead again. Go ahead.
Well, my final question, Danny, was you talked about Carolina, where I grew up as well. My question was, can we create today Black Wall Street business districts across America, similar to what happened in Tulsa back in the 1900s? Can that happen today? What was, can that also be today? These Black business districts?
Your question was, Rick, again, can we create today
Black business districts? Similar Black Wall Street. Can that happen today?
I see what I think the question is. Can we create today what certainly is a part of our own historic memory, that something did happen, something has happened, and African descendants have always built for the future. They've always looked beyond the conditions that they're existed in and built for the future and creating a new narrative and everything. Can we say that? Yeah, the crucible for whether this democracy works or not is on right within the construct and the history of African descendants. And basically, whatever the arguments are, this narrative built on the backs, this great ideal built on the backs on slaves is basically the contradiction that we have to deal with, and building small businesses, encouraging Black entrepreneurship. All of those things are important steps in making that the dynamic of justice. We can talk about accountability, but justice is a whole different thing. And when we talk about our capacity to build and to change, to transform this country, it's built throughout our history. It's our songs, it's our voices, our needs, our sorrow songs, all those things which have made this country what it is. And our fight, our struggle continues to be the struggle that epitomizes the point of view and possibilities of this. Yes.
What Danny, listen, let me say thank you so much for joining us and shedding some insight, some lessons learned from Black Wall Street. We celebrate or memorialize or remember what happened 100 years ago. But it is also the heroes of Black Wall Street, these business owners who were resilient in the time of challenge and struggle, and actually came back in the 1945s. And I understand over 200 businesses came back. And the importance of creating more Black innovators and entrepreneurs are so important to the fabric of our society. And we thank you for the work that you're doing as a consultant, the work that you've done in the past to help portray Black innovators and entrepreneurs across America. So thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to continuing our dialogue and working with you in the days and months to come. Thank you. At this time, I'm delighted to bring up a next conversation, my friend and colleague at the United States Chamber of Commerce. Please join me in welcoming Tom Sullivan, Vice President of the Small Business Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who will lead a conversation with ANTWAUN Griffin, Chief of Staff of the United States Small Business Administration, as we think about what are the tools, the resources, what's the government's role to support the growth and expansion of opportunities for Black-owned businesses in America. Please welcome my good friend, Tom Sullivan. Tom.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's good to be here. Certainly a tough act to follow with you and Danny Glover, but Antoine and I will do our best. I really am honored to be joined by Antoine Griffin, who is the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Small Business Administration. Welcome, Antoine. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Tom.
And what a great segue to this conversation. I mean, Danny Glover and Rick Wade explaining about how important it is to help small business and to encourage entrepreneurship. You're running the agency that is its popularity as an all-time high. I mean, Antoine, from data, I believe first reported by Professor Rob Fairley out in California, that nearly half of Black-owned businesses in America were closed because of COVID-19. And SBA, over the past 13, 14 months, has truly been a lifeline to those businesses and to their employees. And so I'll ask you the question you probably get a lot, but it's relevant specific to today's conversation about Black-owned businesses. What is SBA doing to ensure that Black-owned businesses survive in the near term, but then also thrive in the long term?
Thank you, Tom. And I would be remiss if I did not too acknowledge and thank certainly Danny Glover for all of his work. But I also want to take the time to thank you, Rick, Suzanne Clark, and everyone at the U.S. Chamber for putting this forum together. I think it's a sign of the time, but also critically important that we discuss these issues. And I think part of why we know it's important is, that every part of the business community, every community representing the fabric of America is at the table and talking about these critical issues. So thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. Yeah, small businesses are the backbone of the U.S. economy. And it's poignant that we're talking about African-American owned businesses today. Now, yes, you were right. The COVID-19 pandemic has been particularly devastating to African-American owned businesses, particularly Black women-owned businesses. But the good news is they are still the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. With this information alone, I'm comfortable saying that Black-owned businesses are not only vital to the growth of the U.S. economy, but we at SBA have, worked, particularly in the Biden-Harris administration, to make sure that we're building programs that are more accessible to business owners and entrepreneurs of color, and also women and veteran-owned businesses as well.
Well, thank you, Antoine. And, echoing what Rick commented on a minute ago about resiliency, it's obvious from your experience and what you just mentioned. So there's bad news and good news. And so that bad news is just the horrible devastation of COVID. But the good news is you're already seeing Black-owned, women-owned businesses recover and being resilient. Resiliency is a word I've heard Rick Wade use a lot, and that's certainly apropos of this conversation. You're obviously thinking past COVID. And at the same time, you're recognizing that SBA has a bigger customer base than ever before in the agency's history. So looking past COVID, how are you capturing that resiliency? Do you have any specific plans that SBA has in the works that are really targeted at Black-owned businesses so that they continue to be the fabric of communities?
Absolutely, and thanks for raising that. So, I have to be careful here because our boss, the President of the United States, I think, is on the way to Tulsa to make some news on this point. So I'm gonna be extremely careful here. But here's what I'd say. The administration has been we are moving, to your point, we're moving out of the disaster part and more into the recovery and growth part of sort of our economic Build Back Better program. So that includes also across the government, not just at SBA, providing resources to companies first to keep their doors open, right? To keep the creditors at bay, to keep their payrolls intact through the PPP program this past year. We're also executing right now a restaurant revitalization fund, as well as a grant program targeting our shuttered venues like the performing arts, movie theaters, and all those types of stage venues that have bared the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we move through this, one of the things we know is that we at SBA have to be as entrepreneurial in our approach as the entrepreneurs we serve. But there are two things we cannot get past, right? And that's disparities in wealth. Disinvestment in Black communities like Tulsa and across the country is still felt sharply today. The median Black American family has 13 cents for every $1 of wealth held by white families. And what we know is that, entrepreneurs are, take on risk by nature. So what we want to do, what we aim to do in the administration, and here specifically at SBA, is help mitigate that risk. And one of the things one of the ways we really want to do that is by, the administration, the president's going to be focused on this today, is expanding access to two key wealth creators: home ownership and small business ownership. Specifically in communities of color and disadvantaged communities. So what I'd say about moving forward, the American Jobs Plan, as well as the American Families Plan, are going to be critical to creating the investment in education in the future of America, as well as our infrastructure. These transformative investments in, we don't think about early childhood education and post-education as being drivers of the small business economy, but they are. I'd also say helping to get more of our small businesses doing business with the federal government. The world's largest buying entity is going to be huge in terms of helping to create wealth and capitalizing a lot of our small businesses. If you've got the capacity to do business with the federal government, you can compete and grow your business across the globe. So we're going to redouble our efforts to help make sure more of our minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses have a shot at doing business with the federal government, as well as helping them expand and grow abroad. And also helping to find innovative ways of capitalizing businesses, not just consumer lending and banking.
Mm-hmm. Antoine, thank you. And just so the folks tuning in know, you had already graciously accepted an invitation to this presentation before we knew that the President of the United States would be flying out to Oklahoma and making announcements about home ownership and small business. So I appreciate the sensitivity. We do not want to scoop the President of the United States, but I do think that it's fantastic that you acknowledge, I think, broadly about a focus on home ownership and small business ownership and mitigating risk to allow more Black entrepreneurs into the fold. You mentioned something in your comments about kind of the education component. And I've heard you speak before about taking the long view. And that long view is the next generation of Black-owned businesses. It's the children who are growing up with the mentors who are their parents, their mom, or their dad, who are the entrepreneur. and you talked a little bit about an emphasis of encouraging that next generation of entrepreneurs and innovators. Can you touch on for a moment what some of SBA's focus is to kind of ignite that excitement about entrepreneurship for the next generation?
Absolutely. You know, I mentioned the American Families Plan because it is an investment in the education of the future of America. And one of the hallmarks of this recovery and just sort of the evolution of our economy is become more reliant on small businesses. The likelihood that any of our children or our children's children will work at one shop for 50 years, retire with a gold watch and a pension is increasingly unlikely. So we're working across the government to build programs, both in education and entrepreneurial education, particularly here at the SBA, through our district offices and small business development centers, women-owned business centers, veteran business opportunity centers, to help children and young entrepreneurs grow, learn, and gain the skills they'll need to succeed. Not only does it help to create more entrepreneurs of color from the next generation, but it'll allow current innovators to know that they have a government supporting them and their families. Now, as a special note, we rolled out a program about a week ago called the Community Navigators Pilot Program. And I think this is particularly germane for some of my Chamber of Commerce leaders that are participating in this event. Where SBA is going to be making a difference, to help to grow like our network of communicators and connectors through partnerships with states, local governments, resource partners, and other nonprofit organizations that specifically work with small businesses and underserved communities. So I encourage folks on this event to go check out the Community Navigators Pilot Program at SBA.gov. You'll learn about specific ways that your companies and some of your intermediaries can get access to SBA programs, like whether capital programs or some of the other state-based and local programs that support entrepreneurs and small businesses in your local community.
Antoine, thank you. Thank you for being here as part of this event and recognizing the heroes of Black Wall Street, the business community, and also thank you for mentioning the Community Navigators Program. I think it is really, you deserve enormous amount of credit for not taking the amount of small businesses who are already SBA customers for granted, and instead pushing yourselves to go further into communities that don't necessarily have that access to capital, and explaining to those communities through a major initiative that SBA is there to help. And there are resources and programs that are there for Americans who want to participate in the recovery of our economy. And so I applaud you for that. I applaud you for mentioning that Navigators program. I hope folks do go to SBA.gov and learn more about it. And thank you for being here this afternoon. And at this point, I'll turn the program over to my colleague, Tom Quadman.
Thank you.
Thanks, Antoine.
Thank you, Tom.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Antoine. And as we're talking about the legacy of Tulsa and Black Wall Street, we want to take an opportunity this afternoon to talk about unleashing capital and rebuilding America's Black-owned businesses. Our former CEO at the Chamber, Tom Donahue, always used to have a saying of, if you don't have the cash, you can't make the dash. And what we have found is that there's a significant issue with Black entrepreneurs not only accessing capital, but also as they do try and access capital, they're forced into starting businesses that have higher rates of decline and significant growth challenges. So to discuss these issues, we brought together a very distinguished panel here this afternoon. I'm joined by Adra Cowens, who's a renowned photographer and executive producer of Heroes of Black Wall Street. Bob Green, the president and CEO of the National Association of Investment Companies. Michael Neal, President and CEO of Tulsa Regional Chamber of Commerce, and Kim Saunders, Managing Director of Legacy 2 Advisors and a former president of the National Bankers Association. Welcome, and glad to have you join me this afternoon. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
So let me start with each of you, but let me start with Adger. Can you tell me a little bit about your work, what you're doing to help support Black-owned businesses?
Well, what we are actually doing is trying to change the dynamic, not only with money, but also with image. You know, we are very, very, very conscious of the fact that Hollywood actually made America, the concepts and the ideas. And so what we're trying to do is change that image of Black people and their ability not only to sustain their own businesses, but also to enter the movie business, which is very, very difficult in terms of raising money and raising capital. We've been very much underserved, but we're trying now to get into that game where we can raise money to define our own destiny and make our own images.
So thank you, Adger. Bob, let me turn to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that the National Association of Investment Companies does and what you're doing to help support Black businesses?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Tom. So NAIC is the trade association for diverse-owned private equity firms and hedge funds. And within that, our members are private equity firms, venture capital firms, growth equity firms, all of which aggregate capital for investment along their particular investment thesis. Some of those firms have an investment thesis directly investing in minorities, specifically African-American entrepreneurs. We've been doing it for many, many years. The organization is 51 years old. We originally started as the American Association of MESBICs, and MESBICs were minority enterprise SBICs. So we have a long and rich history. Many of the great business successes that have come through private equity that were minority businesses were investments of NAIC members. Companies like Radio One and TV One, many, many others outside of the media space in construction and in cable vision and other areas. And we're finding that there's a renewed and an increased interest in investing with diverse businesses, largely because of a recognition from some of the social unrest that there is a linkage between economic access and the social unrest that the country has been experiencing for a while now, but most prolifically during last summer.
Great, thank you. Mike, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, Tom, thank you. First of all, I say we're honored. President Biden and Air Force One just touched down in Tulsa about 15 minutes ago. As I'm watching my television above my computer here, he's about to be stepping out, going into the Greenwood Cultural Center. So we're honored to have the President of the United States here for this special event, special occasion this week. We as a local or regional chamber, we represent some 2,200 member companies across 20 counties in Northeast Oklahoma. Our four key strategic initiatives are economic development, really including job creation and capital investment, regional tourism, government advocacy, and community development. Also, we happen to have one of the largest and strongest diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the country among local and regional chambers. It's called Mosaic. It really helps build the case for diversity, equity, inclusion in business, really engages our region's business community to build both their capacity as well as their capability of our diverse workforce, as well as to promote equitable business practices and policies. And so we're delighted with the great work that organization has really been doing for the past 10 or 12 years, Tom.
Great, thank you. Kim, let me turn it over to you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Chamber for this opportunity. I most recently last month completed my term as the president and CEO of the National Bankers Association. That is the leading trade association for minority-owned banks in the country. And that represents African American, Asian American, Native American, and Hispanic American owned banks. It also includes women-owned banks. To the point of access to capital in our association, there are approximately 5,000 banks in the country. Only 142 are currently designated as minority owned by the FDIC. To achieve that designation, you either need to be 51% majority minority owned, or since there are publicly traded banks, the majority of your board and the communities that you serve must be majority minority. In the aggregate, that base represents about 287 billion in assets, would not even make the top 10 banks in the country, but are located in every major urban center in the country. The other thing to note, today we have about 20 Black-owned banks. In 2001, we had 48. Their asset base has been basically flat, about $5 billion in total assets. When you think about the importance of banks to the country, I often liken it to when the country was in the Great Recession. The economy was in a free fall. The government stepped in to prop up the banking system through TARP. And so likewise, the banking system, minority banking system, is going to be the key to revitalizing minority communities.
Thank you, Kim. And I want to take this, at least start this conversation a little bit of a different direction, right? Normally when we're, talking about an issue like this, we're like, okay, which is better, policy X or policy Y, and who's doing what in Congress, whatever else. But Adra, I'd like to actually start with you. What is the role, and you've got such a unique perspective here, right? What is the role of art and film in the portrayal of Black businesses in America, and why is that important for our discussion today?
Well, I think that motion pictures generates a lot of money in all communities all across America. When a company goes into a town to shoot a film, all of the processing of the money, the people working on the film, is generated into the town or to the community that exists. Hitherto, we have not been able to be part of that community in terms of raising money and raising capital from Hollywood. So most of the companies that I've worked with, we've been independent companies, but it's important that this money that we make or we do in terms of motion pictures is generated in the Black community. Black people will go to movies more than anybody else, and that generates a lot of money. So we're trying to position ourselves to not only generate that money, but get some of that money coming by that goes into the community.
Great, thank you. And Kim and Bob, let me turn to you, right? And let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about capital, right? I mean, if you don't have capital, you're not gonna start a business, and if you don't have capital, you're not going to be able to grow a business. And Kim, you were, in talking about our banking system, right? You're talking about numbers that have been flat for 20 years, if not declining, and that's an indicator, right, of entrepreneurism, right? If you don't have that capital, you're not going to start to grow. And obviously, economic growth is a way to address some of the issues, some of the social unrest issues we've talked about. But what is it that we need to do to get that capital engine going to help Black entrepreneurs? So, Kim, let me start with you, and Bob, let's turn it over to you as well.
So I am now focused on Legacy 2 advisors. I've been in the banking system industry over 30 plus years. Starting with Chase in New York, and over the course of that have worked in 3 startup banks, a troubled bank turnaround, and guided a Black-owned bank through the crisis. I also have my own small business. So I'm bringing a lot of lenses to this question, Tom. And so it is going to be critical that we provide tier 1 capital to minority banks across the country, and that tier 1 capital then is used in a transformative way. And that is the strategy that Legacy 2 Advisors is deploying. And we are very excited. I'm truly excited about this next leg of work, because I really do believe that closing the racial inequality gap, and Citi just did a study that said that if we had closed the gap, And if we close the gap going forward over the next 5 years, we'll add $5 trillion to the US economy. So it matters to all of us, and especially as a business community, that we focus on this and get this right. And the banking system, because $1 of capital allows you to leverage that up to $10 in economic impact, and lending in the communities is critical. And minority banks also are the trusted advisors in their communities. And so they play a critical role. And we're looking forward to fostering that growth.
Great. Bob?
Yeah, picking up on Kim's point, she referenced tier one capital. In pure financial terms, it's really a lack of equity that plagues communities of color, particularly the African American community, but also education around how capital is formed. If you talk to entrepreneurs, for example, in Silicon Valley, regardless of their race or ethnicity, that system works so well because the entrepreneurs know the role that they play. They know where to get capital. They know the service providers that have access to capital, and it works. But if you look at virtually every community of color, particularly the African American, but also the Latino community within the US, there's no understanding of where to get capital, how to get capital. Because retail banks are so large in the community, there's a belief that you can walk into a retail bank and you can, sit at one of those side booths and wait for one of the banking managers or banking center managers to come help you talk about an equity finance. And look, for those of us that know financing, we understand that retail banks don't do that. They're not in that business. You're not likely to get even a loan when you first start the business because there's no equity base there. So what we need to really teach people in schools, whether it's in high school, whether it's community college, or whether it's required learning in undergrad, is we need to teach the capital continuum. And that capital continuum says that in order to start a business, you're going to have multiple steps where capital is going to be generated and infused. But the first is founder's capital. The founder has to put up some meaningful amount of equity against their net worth. If they're worth $100, they probably need to put 10 or 20 of those dollars into the business that they're starting. If they're worth $1 million, they ought to put, something meaningful, something so that if times get rough, they won't walk away from it. The next stage of the capital is going to be friends and family. Friends and family is an important element of bringing capital because it's the cheapest capital you can get, because generally they know you, they want to see you be successful. They are not looking for, market performance rate of returns. They're simply looking in most cases to get their money back and maybe some increase beyond that. Following that become the institutional rounds, early venture capital and seed capital, followed by true venture capital, Series A, Series B, Series C, whatever it takes to get that company to break even and profitability. And then as the company matures, there's an opportunity to provide growth capital, all in the form of equity. But we don't have much of that in communities of color. And what we do have is hard to access and very few people understand it. So we need to demyst the capital continuum such that people don't waste time going to the wrong people, get discouraged and burn through what capital they have, but truly are able to access the right form of capital at the right stage of the business, and then understand that performance is the requirement once you receive the capital.
I want to stay on the subject for 1 second. Mike, I want to bring you into this topic as well, because you'd referenced the Mosaic program that you do at Tulsa. But one of the things, we've seen a little bit over the last year, right, is we've seen some corporations starting to step up, right, of that they could actually start to help provide some of their resources to help with this capital continuum. So we saw Square saying, okay, we're going to take 2% of our cash, we're going to put it in MBIs, right, Kim, to your point of that will actually help to build up some of the tier one capital that could then be loaned out. We saw Allstate, as an example, right, do I think $1 billion plus bond issuance with Black institutional investors, and it was more about building up that muscle, right? So you could have some more expertise to help Black entrepreneurs. And then, Mike, you were talking about how you have your Mosaic program. It's a long way of saying, what is the role of other businesses to help with this financing system? And do you think that if that capital is going to be there, that Black entrepreneurs are going to take advantage of it and grow.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say number one, I think they will take advantage of it, and I think they will grow. One example that I'd say we're very proud of is our chair this year, Rose Washington, our first African-American female chair in our 120-year history, has made a major effort. And we've just recently been successful in passing state legislation that would support Black entrepreneurs and minority-owned businesses. And one example is our governor just signed into law a bill that authorizes the Oklahoma Supplier Diversity Initiative. It's a state-sponsored database for agencies and businesses that are intentional, as you referenced, intentionally seeking diverse Oklahoma-based suppliers. Our State Department of Commerce will now develop a certification program for qualifying businesses that would allow them to register with state to be automatically notified of tons of state bidding opportunities. It's really something that our Mosaic program, our chair, Rose Washington, as well as our governor's Minority Business Council, has really worked very aggressively and collaboratively on this past state legislative session. And we think that will go a long way towards supporting many of these small Black-owned and other minority-owned businesses.
Bob and Kim?
Yeah, I think that's powerful. When you look at diversity should be viewed through one with the objective of pushing people forward so that they can support themselves. But there are really four levers you can pull. There's supplier diversity, which was just spoken about by Mike. There's capital investment, which is an area that many corporations used to participate in, but haven't looked at it until recently. There's diversity of your employee base and other aspects of the company. And then there's your community support. What are you doing to support the community? And that's on a holistic basis, culturally, financially, educationally, or academically. All of those are levers that can be pulled. So I applaud Mike and the folks in Tulsa for really coming at this in a comprehensive way. But I think what we've learned is that we can all do more. We've gotten so focused on quarterly profit margins that we've forgotten that we have a requirement to give back to the community, not in a way that just sprinkles and sort of frosts the opportunity, but true structural give back that can be used for people to lift themselves out of poverty. We look every year when we see the hurricane season come. The hurricane season, those hurricanes hit poverty-stricken communities, and we're telling those communities to do things for themselves and pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But it's no surprise you see generation upon generation of people that have been stuck in poverty with no ability to help themselves. I don't believe that it's government's responsibility. I think government can create the climate and the environment to help, but I think that it's the business community that has for far too long let people languish and force people to exist outside of the system. And we want to bring more people in. That's what the whole inclusion part of DE&I is all about.
And I'm in total agreement with what—
I'm going to leave you with the last word.
I was just going to say I'm in total agreement with what Bob said. To whom much is given, much is required. And so I agreed with his statement. As corporations look at the opportunity before them, there is a tremendous opportunity to help close the racial wealth gap. And the documentation and data shows that it's to everyone's benefit to do so.
Great. I want to thank you all very much. I mean, this was a 20-minute conversation. I think we could have spent a couple of hours on this. And you know what? I think we will be having more conversations. So I look to bring you each into different events to do that. So thank you very much and appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you also, Tom, and everyone else for joining us today. I'm Latricia Boone, Vice President of the Equality of Opportunity Initiative here at the United States Chamber of Commerce. We are truly honored to bring today's speakers together for this very important, inspiring, and eye-opening conversation. I want to especially thank our speakers for helping us to commemorate the rich history and legacy of the Greenwood District of Tulsa, Oklahoma. A century after the 1921 events of Tulsa, There are not only many lessons relevant today, but a glaring recognition of the legacy of the Greenwood District for the Tulsa community and for the business community nationwide. As we heard today, the businesses that created Black Wall Street are pillars of resiliency, ingenuity, prosperity, pride, and promise for the generations of businesses and entrepreneurs that have come behind them. Their stories are centerpieces of our history and create a foundation for the future we are building. I know here at the U.S. Chamber, we are committed to carrying this conversation beyond today's event to ensure that we are continuing to build on the Tulsa legacy and open up opportunities to increase support for and investment in Black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs and communities across this country. Through our Equality of Opportunity initiative, we are actively developing and advancing solutions that help to close race-based opportunity gaps, especially for our small and growing diverse businesses. In honor of names like J.B. Stratford, O.W. Gurley, John and Lola Williams, Dr. A.C. Jackson, James Nails, Susie Bell, Mabel B. Little, just a few of our heroes of Black Wall Street, we are proud to partner with the Tulsa Regional Chamber and more than 600 other state and local chambers and national business associations across the country to advance this work and continue to center the experiences of Black-owned businesses, entrepreneurs, and innovators. Thank you again for joining us today. Visit theuschamber.com to find out more about the Equality of Opportunity Initiative and how you can partner with or engage us at the U.S. Chamber as we work to build an inclusive economy and realize true progress for the business community and our nation. Thank you.